The war ended the way fires do in dry country. Not all at once, but in coughing bursts of ash and heat that refused to die. Alejandro Reyes rode through what was left of the frontier, with the smell of burnt mesquite in his nose and the echo of gunfire still rattling his bones. The last cannon had fallen silent 3 days ago, yet the land hadn't gotten the message. It hissed and creaked, cracked timbers popping like distant shots as the sun climbed over the Badlands. Alejandro kept his hat low. He had learned not to look too hard at the ground. The ground remembered everything. His horse, Luna, picked her way through the debris of a ruined supply line. Splintered wagons, spilled flour turned to paste by blood and dew, a broken wheel still slowly spinning in the wind. Alejandro's right hand hovered near the butt of his revolver, out of habit more than fear. Habits survived wars better than men. He told himself he was just passing through, heading south, always south, toward a place where the war couldn't follow. That's when he heard it. Not a gunshot, not the wind. Something smaller. A sound that didn't belong out here. A cry, thin, strangled, swallowed quickly, as if whoever made it knew better than to be heard. Alejandro reined in hard. Luna snorted, ears flicking forward. He dismounted, boots sinking into ash-soft earth, and listened. Another sound followed, metal clinking softly, then a cough that turned into a wheeze. "Damn it," he muttered, because the war was supposed to be done with him. He followed the sound toward a shallow ravine choked with smoke. Halfway down, the ground gave way beneath his weight. Alejandro slid, slammed shoulder first into rock, and rolled into shadow just as a rifle cracked above him. Stone exploded inches from his face. He came up shooting, 2 shots, fast. The echoes chased each other through the ravine. A body tumbled from the edge and hit the dirt with a wet finality. Alejandro waited, counting heartbeats, lungs burning. Silence answered back. He climbed, every muscle screaming, and peered over the rim. The shooter lay face down in a rebel coat too big for him. A boy, really, dead before he ever got the chance to be old. Alejandro swallowed and turned away. That's when he saw her. She was wedged between a toppled ammunition crate and the ravine wall, knees pulled tight to her chest, wrists bound with telegraph wire. Her face was smeared with soot and dried blood, black hair hacked short like someone had done it with a knife instead of scissors. Her eyes, wide, dark, terrified, locked onto his revolver. Alejandro slowly holstered it and raised both hands. "It's okay," he said softly, in Spanish first, then English. "No te haré daño. I won't hurt you." She didn't answer, didn't blink. Another sound rolled across the plain. Hoofbeats. Not one rider. Many. Alejandro cursed under his breath. The front lines were supposed to be miles east, but wars had a way of spilling everywhere. He crouched beside the girl, hands working fast on the wire. "You gotta move," he whispered. Her lips trembled. When she finally spoke, it came out in broken Spanish, threaded with a different rhythm, unfamiliar but desperate. "They come back. They always come back." The wire snapped free. Alejandro shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders just as a bullet struck the crate above their heads, showering them with splinters. He scooped her up, light as a bundle of sticks, and ran. They didn't make it 10 steps before the ravine erupted with gunfire. Alejandro dove behind a boulder, clutching the girl to his chest as lead chewed the air around them. Luna screamed somewhere above. Smoke thickened, turning the world into a gray maze. Alejandro checked his revolver. 3 bullets left. "Listen to me," he murmured into the girl's hair, steady even as his heart tried to break free of his ribs. "When I say run, you run. Don't look back." Her fingers fisted in his shirt. Alejandro peeked around the rock and felt his stomach drop. Riders were circling, cutting off escape routes with practiced ease. Not soldiers, scavengers, the worst kind. The war might have ended. But for them, it was just beginning. The riders moved like they owned the ruin, slow, confident, already tasting whatever misery they meant to pull from the bones of the land. Alejandro counted 6 at first, then 8. Too many. Always too many when it mattered. He slid a bullet into the chamber with a quiet, practiced click. The girl stiffened. "Easy," he breathed. "I've got you, I promise." Promises were dangerous things. He made one anyway. A voice cut through the smoke, close and amused. "You can come out, friend. War's over. No need to die tired." Alejandro smiled without humor. He leaned out just enough and fired. The man on the painted horse pitched backward, a red bloom opening in his chest. The others shouted, chaos snapping into motion. Gunfire tore into the boulder, stone chips slicing Alejandro's cheek. He hissed, but didn't slow. He grabbed a fallen rifle from the dead scavenger near the ravine rim, slung it, and shoved the girl toward a narrow fissure in the rock. "Go. Now." She hesitated. Just a second, but then she ran. Alejandro followed, firing blind shots to keep heads down. The fissure twisted like a snake, barely wide enough for an adult, plunging into darkness that smelled of damp earth and iron. Behind them, a grenade detonated, the blast throwing Alejandro forward. His ears rang. The world tilted. They burst out into a dry creek bed on the far side, sunlight stabbing his eyes. Luna stood there, miraculously unhurt, reins tangled in brush. Alejandro swung the girl up onto the saddle and mounted behind her in one fluid motion. "Hold on," he said. She wrapped both arms around the saddle horn just as Luna leapt forward. Bullets chased them across the creek bed. One tore through Alejandro's sleeve, burning hot. Another struck the ground inches from Luna's hooves. He leaned low, steering hard toward a line of dead cottonwoods. The trees offered cover, and something worse. He remembered too late. The ground collapsed. Horse, man, and child plunged into darkness as the old mine shaft gave way beneath them. They fell fast, Luna screaming, Alejandro twisting his body to shield the girl. They slammed into gravel and rot with bone-jarring force. The world went black. When Alejandro came back to himself, the mine was silent, except for dripping water, and Luna's labored breathing. His head throbbed. His left arm screamed with pain that told him something was very wrong. The girl stirred. "You alive?" he whispered. She nodded, eyes reflecting faint light from above. "They won't follow," she said with strange certainty. "They're afraid of the holes." Alejandro managed a weak laugh. "Smart of you." He checked Luna first, bruised, shaken, but standing. Then he looked at his arm. The bone sat wrong beneath the skin. He bit back a curse and tore a strip from his shirt to bind it tight. "We can't stay," he said. The girl pointed deeper into the mine. "There's another way out." "How do you know?" She hesitated, then said quietly, "I've been running a long time." They moved through the mine by feel, past rusted carts and skeletons that had no names left. At one point, voices echoed faintly from above, angry, frustrated. The scavengers were still there. A cave-in thundered behind them, dust rolling like fog. Whether it was deliberate or just the mine finally giving up, Alejandro didn't know. He only knew the sound meant they were trapped or saved. They emerged miles away, near dusk, into a valley untouched by fire. Grass bent in the wind. A river caught the last light like molten gold. Alejandro collapsed to his knees, exhaustion finally winning. The girl knelt beside him. For the first time, she reached out and touched his broken arm with gentle hands. "My name is May," she said. Then, after a pause, softer, "But my mama called me Marisol." Alejandro closed his eyes, the war fading just enough for something else to take its place. Hope, sharp and terrifying. Alejandro dreamed of fire. Not the clean kind that cooks beans or warms hands, but the crawling kind. The kind that eats towns and leaves names behind in the smoke. He woke with a sharp intake of breath, fingers clawing for a revolver that wasn't there. Instead, there was a river. It whispered beside him, slow and steady, like it had all the time in the world. Moonlight painted the water silver. For a moment, Alejandro didn't remember how he'd gotten here. Then pain crashed back into him, bright and unforgiving, radiating from his arm and spreading through his ribs. He groaned. "You're awake." The voice was soft, cautious. He turned his head and saw Marisol, sitting cross-legged near a small fire. She'd done a decent job of hiding it, banked low between stones, smoke pushed flat by the night wind. Alejandro noted that with a flicker of pride and concern. No child learned tricks like that unless the world had taught them hard. "How long was I out?" he asked. "Most of the night." She held up a tin cup. "You were shaking. I gave you water." He pushed himself upright with his good arm, teeth clenched. The pain made stars bloom in his vision. "You shouldn't have stayed." She met his eyes, chin lifting. "You saved me." That stopped him. Alejandro accepted the cup, drinking slowly. The water tasted of iron and cold stone, but it steadied him. He glanced around. Luna grazed nearby, reins tied properly, saddle off. Someone had even cleaned the blood from Alejandro's sleeve and retied the makeshift splint tighter than he'd managed. "You do all that?" he asked. May shrugged. "My mama was a nurse before. Her voice faltered but didn't break. "She taught me." The river shifted, carrying something pale past them. Alejandro stiffened until he realized it was just driftwood. Still, unease crawled along his spine. Rivers after wars had a habit of carrying worse things. "We can't stay," he said again, though it sounded weaker now. "They'll keep looking." She poked the fire with a stick. "They won't cross the river." "Why not?" She hesitated. "Because this is where people disappear." Alejandro snorted quietly. "That's most places these days." But when dawn came, he understood what she meant. They followed the river downstream, keeping to the trees. The fog lifted slowly, revealing what the water hid. Wreckage of wagons, rifles tangled in reeds, bones bleached white and smooth. A blue uniform snagged on a rock, still occupied. Alejandro looked away, stomach tight. May didn't. "They threw us here," she said. "The ones who didn't walk fast enough." Alejandro stopped. "Us?" She nodded. "The migrants. From the south. From across the water." She pointed vaguely west. "They said we were the enemy. Or spies. Or nothing at all." Anger flared, hot and dangerous. Alejandro forced it down. Anger made mistakes. They moved on. By midday, the heat pressed down hard. Alejandro's arm throbbed despite the splint, his steps slowing. He hated the way May kept glancing back at him, measuring, calculating. He'd been the protector yesterday. Today, the balance was shifting. A sharp crack split the air. Alejandro dove, dragging May down with him as a shot tore through leaves overhead. Another followed. Then a third. Not scavengers, soldiers. Blue coats this time, ghosts of an army that hadn't learned how to stop. They advanced along the riverbank, boots splashing, rifles ready. Alejandro counted again. 4, maybe 5. He checked his gun. Empty. His jaw tightened. He scanned the bank, eyes snagging on a fallen log half submerged in mud, roots clawing upward like fingers. An idea sparked, reckless, but better than none. "Can you swim?" he whispered. May's eyes widened. "Yes." "Good. When I say go, you go under the water and hold onto the roots. Don't come up until I whistle." "And you?" Alejandro smiled thinly. "I'll make noise." Before she could argue, he stood and ran the opposite direction, shouting curses in Spanish and English both. The soldiers reacted instantly, gunfire snapping, dirt leaping at his feet. Alejandro zigzagged toward the log, heart hammering. At the last second, he dove, Cold swallowed him whole. He slammed into the mud beneath the log, lungs burning, vision dim. He felt roots scrape his back, fingers, small, steady, grab his belt. He held still, every second stretching. Boots splashed above, voices shouted. Someone fired into the water. Then, slowly, they moved on. Alejandro surfaced minutes later, gasping quietly. May surfaced beside him, hair plastered to her face, eyes bright with something like triumph. They shared a look, a grin. Brief, fragile. The war hadn't taken that yet. Not today. They didn't stop running until the river curved away and the land rose into broken hills. Alejandro's lungs burned, his arm screamed, and every step sent a dull shock through his ribs. But fear kept him upright. Fear, and the lightness of May's hand gripping his belt whenever the ground grew treacherous. By late afternoon, they reached an abandoned way station crouched between two ridges. Its roof had collapsed on one side, and the sign out front swung on a single nail, creaking like it was whispering secrets to the wind. Alejandro studied the tracks in the dust. Old. Days. Maybe weeks. No fresh sign. Inside, he said. The air within smelled of mold and old whiskey. Sunlight cut through gaps in the walls, striping the floor. Alejandro sank onto a crate, sweat slicking his brow. His arm had swollen badly, the skin stretched and angry. May knelt without being asked. She unwound the splint, jaw set, and pressed gently along the bone. Alejandro sucked in a breath through his teeth. "It's broken," she said. "I know, it healed wrong already." He managed a crooked smile. "You planning to fix it?" She looked at him, really looked and nodded. "But it will hurt." Alejandro laughed once. "It already does." She reset the bone with a sharp, decisive motion. Pain exploded white-hot, ripping a shout from his chest. The world tilted again, but this time he stayed conscious, clinging to the sound of May's steady breathing until it passed. When it was done, she bound the arm tight, better than before. "You should have died," she said quietly. Alejandro blinked. "Excuse me." She met his eyes. "Most men do. Out here." He didn't argue. They rested until the shadows stretched long. Alejandro checked his supplies. Thin, but workable. 2 bullets scavenged from the mine. 1 from a dead soldier's pouch by the river. 3 chances left. As they prepared to leave, the floorboards creaked behind them. Alejandro turned, gun up. A man stood in the doorway, hands raised, smile thin as a blade. He wore a battered officer's coat and a bandage stained dark at the chest. Alejandro recognized him instantly. "You," he said. The man chuckled. "I get that a lot. I shot you. Didn't take." He tapped the bandage. Missed the heart by an inch. "You always were bad at finishing things, Reyes." May shifted behind Alejandro, tension radiating from her small frame. The man's eyes flicked to her, curious. "Well now, that explains the trouble." Alejandro's finger tightened on the trigger. "Step back." The man didn't. "Name's Caldwell. Captain, once upon a time. The war ended, but I seem to have found myself a new assignment." He whistled sharply. Outside, horses snorted. Alejandro's mind raced. He couldn't win a straight fight. Caldwell knew it too. The man's smile widened. "Hand over the girl," Caldwell said lightly. "And I might let you limp away." May's hand clenched in Alejandro's coat. Alejandro felt something settle inside him, heavy and certain. "No," he said. Caldwell sighed. "Shame." The first shot came from outside, shattering the wall inches from Alejandro's head. Wood exploded. May screamed. Alejandro grabbed her and dove through the back window as the way station erupted in gunfire, splinters and dust filling the air. They hit the ground hard and rolled, coming up running as bullets chewed the ruins behind them. Caldwell's laughter followed them into the hills. "I'll find you," he called. "You don't stay dead, Reyes, but neither do I." Alejandro ran until his vision blurred. The girl light against his side. The sound of that laughter burned into his skull. The war had given him a shadow, and it was still breathing. They ran until the hills folded into a maze of stone and thorn. Twilight bled out of the sky, leaving behind a bruised purple dusk that made every shadow look alive. Alejandro didn't stop until Luna nearly stumbled, foam flecking her bit, her sides heaving. Only then did he slow, pulling them into a narrow cleft between two slabs of rock. "Down," he whispered. May slid to the ground without a sound. She'd learned fast, too fast for someone her age. Alejandro pressed his back to the stone, revolver loose in his good hand, and listened. At first, there was nothing. Then came the dogs. Low baying carried on the wind, distant, but unmistakable. Caldwell hadn't just brought men. He'd brought teeth. Alejandro closed his eyes for half a heartbeat. "Of course you did." "We can't outrun them," May whispered. "No," he agreed, "but we can confuse them." He scanned the ground, mind snapping into that cold, sharp place the war had carved into him. A trickle of water ran along the base of the rocks, disappearing into a tangle of brush. "Take off your shoes," he murmured. She did instantly, not asking why. Alejandro lifted her, wincing as pain flared, and carried her downstream through the shallow water for as long as his legs would allow. Every step felt like fire. When his strength faltered, he set her down behind a dense cluster of prickly pear and scrub oak. "Stay here," he said. "No matter what you hear. What if they catch you?" He forced a smile. "They won't." He walked back upriver alone, then doubled back through the rocks, climbing until his lungs screamed. By the time the baying grew louder, he was perched above a narrow pass, moonlight just bright enough to work by. He had one bullet left. Alejandro loosened a slab of shale, muscles trembling, sweat stinging his eyes. The dogs' snarls were close now. Voices followed, men laughing, confident. "Smell him, boys," someone called. Alejandro waited. When the first dog burst into the pass, he kicked. The rock slid, then fell, smashing into the ground with a thunderous crack. More stones followed, cascading into the narrow channel. The dogs yelped, men shouted. One scream cut short. Dust filled the air. Alejandro fired his last bullet into the chaos, not to kill, just to sell the lie, and ran. He moved downhill fast, reckless, branches tearing at his clothes. Pain blurred into something distant. He found May exactly where he'd left her, eyes wide, hands clamped over her mouth. "Let's go," he whispered. They didn't stop until dawn. They crossed into a stretch of land the maps had forgotten, salt flats broken by scrub, old mission ruins half swallowed by sand. Alejandro finally collapsed beneath the crumbling arch of a chapel, with no roof and a cross cracked clean in half. He laughed weakly. "Seems right." May sat beside him, silent for a long time. Then she reached into her coat and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. She unfolded it carefully. A photograph. Faded. A woman with kind eyes, an arm around a little girl with longer hair, and the same steady gaze. "My mama," May said. "She told me to keep walking north. Said I'd find people who remembered how to be human." Alejandro swallowed. His throat hurt worse than his arm. "I don't know if I'm that," he said. May looked at him. "You are to me." For a moment, the world was quiet. No guns, no shouting. Just wind through broken stone. Then, Luna snorted sharply. Alejandro's head snapped up. On the horizon, a single rider watched from the rise, silhouette unmistakable even at distance. He raised a hand, not in greeting, but promise, and turned his horse away. Caldwell. Alejandro let out a slow breath. The chase wasn't over. It was only changing shape. He looked at May, small and stubborn and alive. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow we move again." The girl nodded and curled against the stone. Alejandro stayed awake, staring at the pale sky, knowing one thing with bone-deep certainty. As long as he breathed, the war would have to come through him first. Morning came hard and white over the salt flats, the sun noting every mistake a man could make. Alejandro woke stiff and aching, his arm pulsing like it had its own heartbeat. For a brief, dangerous second, he wondered if it would be easier to stop running. Then he saw May, asleep beneath his coat, and the thought vanished. They left the ruined chapel before the heat grew cruel. The land ahead rose into low mesas, pocked with caves and old trails used long before this war had learned how to kill. Alejandro favored his bad arm and kept his eyes on the horizon. Caldwell wouldn't rush now. He'd hunt. By midday, they reached a cluster of whitewashed buildings clinging to a dry arroyo. Another mission, older than the last, its bell tower cracked but still standing. Smoke curled faintly from behind a wall. Alejandro halted, instincts screaming. "We go around," he said. May shook her head. "You need help." Before he could argue, a shout rang out. "Alto!" Figures emerged from behind the walls. Men and women, rifles raised but hands steady. Not soldiers, not scavengers. Refugees, by the look of them. Hard-eyed, tired, alive. A woman stepped forward, her hair braided tight, a scar cutting through one eyebrow. "You lost?" Alejandro raised his good hand. "Passing through." Her gaze flicked to May, softened just a fraction. "Everyone's passing through." They were led inside, through courtyards turned into gardens, through rooms that smelled of corn and boiled coffee. Alejandro felt the weight of eyes on him, on his injury, on the child who never let go of his coat. The woman introduced herself as Rosa. "We keep to ourselves," she said. "We don't fight unless we have to." Alejandro nodded. "That makes two of us." A man with a gray beard set Alejandro's arm properly, clucking his tongue. "You'll keep it," he said, "but you won't like the weather anymore." "I already don't," Alejandro replied, earning a few quiet laughs. For the first time in days, he ate until his hands stopped shaking. May did too, though she kept glancing at the door. That night, bells rang. Not in warning, slow, deliberate. Alejandro felt the hairs on his neck rise. He stood, reaching for a rifle. Rosa met his gaze. "They're here, aren't they?" "Yes. How many?" "Enough." Caldwell didn't attack right away. He sent a message instead, a flare arcing into the dark sky, burning red as blood. The dogs bayed beyond the arroyo, closer now. Rosa swore softly. "We won't give you the girl." Alejandro looked at her, surprised. Rosa shrugged. "Some lines don't move." The first shot came just after midnight. Chaos followed. Gunfire, shouting, the sharp crack of glass. Alejandro fought like a man who had nothing left to bargain with. He moved through smoke and shadow, guiding where he could, shooting when he must. May stayed where Rosa put her, hidden beneath the altar, hands over her ears. When it was over, the mission burned. Bodies lay in the courtyard. Caldwell was gone. Alejandro found May coughing in the smoke but unharmed. She clung to him, shaking. Rosa pressed a small bundle into his hand. Food, water, a map with a single trail marked in charcoal. "Northwest," she said. "There's a ranch. Quiet people if you make it." Alejandro nodded, unable to speak. They left before dawn. The bell tower collapsing behind them, in a roar of stone and sparks. As the mission disappeared into smoke, Alejandro felt the weight of something heavier than pursuit settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about not letting the world finish breaking what little it had left. They followed Rosa's map into country that didn't forgive mistakes. The trail thinned to a suggestion, then vanished altogether, leaving only rock and thorn and a sky that felt too big to trust. Alejandro set a steady pace, slower than he liked, mindful of his arm and of May's shorter legs. She never complained, not once. By the second day, they heard nothing behind them. That worried him more than gunfire. Caldwell was patient when it suited him. He liked corners. He liked letting hope stretch thin before cutting it. They crossed a dry lake bed at dawn, footprints erased almost as soon as they were made by the whispering wind. Halfway across, May stopped. "Don't move," she said. Alejandro froze. "What is it?" She crouched, brushing salt aside to reveal a thin metal line, barely visible. A tripwire. Old but not dead. "Someone mined this place," Alejandro muttered. "Recently," May said. "The sand hasn't settled." They detoured wide, skirting the edge of the lake bed, for hours. By the time they reached solid ground, the sun was high, and Alejandro's vision swam. He drank sparingly, hating every measured swallow. That night, they camped among boulders, shaped like sleeping animals. The wind howled through gaps, making the rocks moan. May huddled close, staring into the fire. "Why won't he stop?" she asked suddenly. Alejandro didn't pretend not to understand. Some men don't know what they are without a war. Or a target. She considered that. "What are you without it?" The question landed harder than any bullet. "I'm trying to find out," he said. They were nearly asleep when Luna spooked, jerking her head up, nostrils flaring. Alejandro rolled to his feet, knife in hand. Footsteps. Careful. Human. A figure emerged from the rocks, hands raised. A woman this time, younger than Rosa. Her clothes patched with mismatched fabric, a rifle slung, but not aimed. "I'm alone," she said quickly. "I saw your fire." Alejandro didn't lower the knife. People who are alone don't last. She gave a humorless smile. "That's why I'm asking." They shared food under a truce as fragile as spun glass. The woman's name was Clara. She'd been running since the first year of the war, from army to army, border to border. When Alejandro mentioned Caldwell, her face drained of color. "He's burning the land behind you," she said, "leaving signs. He wants people to know who's coming." Alejandro closed his eyes briefly. "How far behind?" 2 days. Maybe less. Clara didn't stay long. Before she left, she pressed something into May's hand, a small brass whistle. "For when quiet is dangerous," she said. The next morning they found the sign. A dead horse, strung up between 2 rocks, Caldwell's mark carved into the hide. Alejandro stared at it for a long moment, jaw tight. "He's angry," May said softly. "Yes," Alejandro replied. "That makes him sloppy." They pushed hard after that, cutting through a canyon so narrow the sun barely touched the ground. Halfway through, shots rang out from above. Rocks shattered. Dust rained down. Ambush. Alejandro shoved May against the canyon wall as men appeared along the rim. Caldwell stepped into view last, slow, clapping echoing off stone. Every time he called down, smiling. "You take the long way around." Alejandro raised his empty hands. "Let her go," Caldwell laughed. "You still think this is a bargain?" A shot rang out, too close, too sharp. And then something unexpected happened. The canyon answered. A roar, built from deep within the earth, as the ground trembled. The shot stopped. Cracks raced along the canyon walls. Caldwell's smile vanished. "Move!" Alejandro shouted. The walls collapsed inward in a storm of stone and dust. Alejandro grabbed May and ran, leaping over falling rock, lungs burning, the world coming apart around them. When the dust settled, the canyon was gone, sealed shut by tons of rubble. Caldwell was gone too. Alive or dead, Alejandro didn't know. He only knew they were still standing on the other side, the path ahead finally open. May looked up at him, eyes wide, breathless, alive. Alejandro let out a shaky laugh. "For once," he said, "the land picked a side." They walked on, not daring to look back, while somewhere behind them a war finally began to lose their trail. The land beyond the collapsed canyon felt different, like stepping out of a held breath. The air grew cooler, the wind gentler, carrying the scent of juniper instead of ash. Alejandro didn't trust it. Peace had learned how to disguise itself too well. They walked for most of the day without speaking. May hummed softly now and then, tuneless, almost absent-minded, but it steadied his nerves. When they finally crested a low ridge, the world opened into a broad valley, stitched with green. A ranch sat near the center, small but solid. A windmill turned lazily. Cattle grazed. Smoke rose straight and calm from a chimney. Alejandro stopped. "This is it," he said, though it sounded more like a question. May squinted. "It looks, normal." "That's what worries me." They approached on foot, hands visible. A woman stepped out onto the porch, rifle resting easily against her shoulder. She watched them for a long moment before calling out, "You lost?" Alejandro felt a strange echo at the words, passing through. The woman studied his arm, his face, then May. Something in her expression softened, just a touch. "Name's Isabel," she said. "You're welcome to water your horse. Food costs stories." Alejandro exhaled. "I've got a few." They stayed the night. No alarms, no gunfire, just the lowing of cattle and the creak of the windmill. Alejandro slept poorly anyway, waking at every sound. When morning came and nothing had burned down, he almost laughed. Isabel listened without interrupting as Alejandro told a careful version of their journey. When he finished, she nodded once. "You can stay a day, maybe two." That afternoon, May helped gather eggs. She smiled more than Alejandro had seen since the river. A small thing, but it hit him harder than any fight. That evening, as the sun bled gold across the valley, Isabel asked quietly, "Is she your daughter?" Alejandro hesitated. "No." Isabel waited. "She's someone I'm protecting." Isabel glanced toward May, laughing with an older ranch hand near the fence. "You're doing more than that." Alejandro didn't answer. The night was deep when he heard it, a distant whistle, not the wind, sharp, deliberate. May sat up at the same time he did, hand already closing around the brass whistle Clara had given her. Alejandro was on his feet in a heartbeat, rifle in hand, pulse roaring in his ears. The ranch lights stayed dark, no shouting, no dogs. Another whistle sounded, closer now. Alejandro felt the old certainty settle in his gut. "He's alive," he murmured. May's face went pale. "Caldwell." "Yes." They moved without waking the others, slipping toward the corral. The third whistle came from the far ridge, taunting, patient. Alejandro squeezed May's shoulder. "Whatever happens, you run to Isabel. Do you hear me?" She nodded, jaw set. A figure stepped into moonlight on the ridge. One man, no horses, no army. Caldwell raised a hand in mock greeting. Alejandro raised his rifle. The distance was long. The shot would be hard. Caldwell smiled wider. "Still protecting what's left of the world," he called softly. Alejandro didn't answer. The trigger tightened under his finger as the wind shifted, the valley holding its breath once more. The wind chose that moment to change its mind. Alejandro felt it against his cheek, just as he squeezed the trigger. A soft betrayal, barely there, but enough. The rifle cracked, echo rolling across the valley, and the shot went wide, tearing dirt from the ridge a foot to Caldwell's left. Caldwell laughed. A real laugh this time, rich and pleased. Still rushing it, he called. "You always rush the important moments." Alejandro chambered another round, heart pounding. He could take the second shot. He knew he could. But Caldwell didn't move. He stood open, fearless, or pretending to be, like a man daring fate to blink first. May tugged at Alejandro's coat. "He wants you to shoot again. I know." Because the second shot would give Caldwell what he wanted: noise, attention, panic. Isabel and the ranch hands would wake. Guns would come out. Lines would be drawn. And Caldwell would slip away into the confusion, smiling, alive, and closer than ever. Alejandro lowered the rifle. Caldwell's smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. There it is, he said softly. You're learning. He took a step back into shadow. I'll give you a gift, Reyes. One quiet night. Say goodbye properly. Before Alejandro could respond, Caldwell turned and vanished down the far side of the ridge, his footsteps swallowed by grass and distance. Silence rushed in to fill the space he left behind. Alejandro stayed frozen for a long moment, scanning the dark, waiting for another trick. None came. Finally, he lowered the rifle, hands shaking, not from fear, but from restraint. May looked up at him. Why didn't you stop him? Alejandro knelt, so they were eye to eye. Because he wants me angry. And because as long as he's chasing me, he's not burning everything else. She frowned. That doesn't mean he won't. No, Alejandro agreed. But it means we choose the ground. They woke Isabel and told her enough of the truth that she believed the rest on her own. The ranch didn't argue. By sunrise, they were ready. Supplies packed, cattle moved closer, lookout posts set. You don't have to leave, Isabel said, handing Alejandro a canteen. We've stood against worse. Alejandro shook his head. This one's mine. May said nothing as they walked away from the ranch. But she didn't look back either. The valley stayed quiet behind them, whole and breathing. They took to the high ground, following a trail that led toward the mountains, where snow still clung stubbornly to shadowed stone. The climb was slow. Alejandro's arm ached constantly now, a deep, grinding pain that promised consequences later. By midday, clouds rolled in, heavy and low. That's when they found the bodies. 3 of Caldwell's men, laid out carefully near the trail. No gunshots, knives, clean work. May stared. He killed his own people. Alejandro crouched, examining the cuts. No, he said slowly. Someone else did. He stood, scanning the ridgeline. A warning then, or an invitation. That night, as snow began to fall, soft, quiet, almost gentle, Alejandro understood what Caldwell had truly given him. Not a head start, a choice. And choices, he knew, were the most dangerous weapons of all. Snow changed the rules. Sound died first. Footsteps vanished into white. Distance lied. Alejandro pulled his coat tighter around May as they climbed into the pines, every breath ghosting the air. The bodies stayed behind them, half buried already, as if the land itself wanted them forgotten. Someone's hunting him, May said quietly. Yes, Alejandro replied, and they're good at it. They made camp beneath a stand of firs, the fire barely more than a promise of warmth. Alejandro studied the map Rosa had given him, now creased and damp, then the mountains beyond. He knew these slopes, not by name, but by instinct. Old smuggling paths, old graves, old favors. The whistle came just after midnight, not Caldwell's. Lower, shorter, 3 notes repeated once. Alejandro was on his feet instantly, knife in hand. May didn't reach for the whistle this time. She watched him instead, reading his face. A figure stepped into the firelight, snow dusting her shoulders like ash. She wore no uniform, no insignia. Just layered clothes, a blade at each hip, and eyes that didn't miss much. Easy, she said. If I wanted you dead, you'd be colder already. Alejandro didn't relax. You killed the men on the trail, she nodded. They were loud. Why? Her gaze flicked to May. Because he doesn't get to touch children anymore. Alejandro felt something tighten in his chest. You know Caldwell. I know his kind, she corrected. Name's Lucia. They talked in low voices while the fire cracked softly. Lucia had been following Caldwell for weeks, cutting away his reach, letting him feel hunted for once. She'd lost family to men like him. She didn't say how many. He's heading north, she said, toward the border passes. He thinks he can disappear. He won't, Alejandro said. Lucia studied him. You're wrong. He will, unless someone finishes it. Silence settled between them, thick as falling snow. "I won't use the girl as bait," Alejandro said finally. Lucia's mouth twitched. "Good. Neither would I." They formed a plan without ever calling it that. Lucia would keep pressure on Caldwell from the east. Alejandro would take May west, toward the old ranch Rosa marked. Quiet people, far from passes and armies. "If he follows you," Lucia said, "I'll hear him. And if he doesn't?" Lucia smiled, thin and sharp. "Then I will." She vanished before dawn, leaving only a single track that disappeared into fresh snow. The journey grew harder after that. Storms rolled in fast, burying trails, forcing them to shelter in caves and abandoned line shacks. Alejandro's arm worsened. Fever came and went, leaving him weak and shaking. May learned how to pack snow around the swelling, how to make bitter tea from pine needles and bark. One night, Alejandro woke choking, the world spinning. May was there instantly. "Stay with me," she said, voice fierce, hand steady. "You don't get to stop now." He focused on her face, on the stubborn set of her jaw. "You sound like my wife," he rasped before he could stop himself. May froze. "You have a wife." He nodded faintly. "South." She stayed behind when the war moved north. Someone had to keep a home alive. May swallowed. "Does she know about me?" "No," Alejandro said. Then, after a pause, "But she will." The fever broke 2 days later. They descended out of the snow into high grass and wide sky. Smoke rose in the distance, controlled, domestic. The ranch from the map. Alejandro stopped at the ridge, heart pounding. Not from fear this time, but from the weight of what came next. Behind them, far off, a single gunshot echoed once, then nothing. Lucia, he thought. Or Caldwell. Either way, the chase was ending. Alejandro looked down at May. "Whatever happens now," he said, "you're not alone anymore." She nodded, eyes bright. And together they walked toward the place where running might finally stop. The ranch looked smaller up close. That wasn't a bad thing. Small meant careful. Small meant people who noticed when something changed. Alejandro slowed his pace as they approached, scanning the tree line, the fences, the way the grass bent around the buildings. No guards in towers, no banners. Just life going about the dangerous business of continuing. A woman stood near the corral, her back to them, dark hair braided down her spine. She was arguing gently with a mule that clearly did not care. Alejandro stopped walking. May felt it instantly. "Is it?" "Yes," he said, voice rough. "That's her." The woman turned at the sound of Luna's hoof on stone. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, she dropped the rope. "Alejandro!" He didn't remember crossing the distance between them. He only remembered her hands on his face, warm and real, her eyes searching for wounds that weren't just on his body. "You're alive," she breathed, half laughing, half crying. "So are you," he said, and meant far more than the words could hold. She saw May then. The girl stood very straight, chin lifted, ready to be judged. Alejandro felt a flash of panic. Ridiculous, given everything they'd survived, but sharp and real. "This is May," he said. "Marisol." His wife, Elena, knelt immediately, bringing herself level with the girl. No sudden movements, no questions yet. "Hello, May," she said softly. "I'm Elena." May hesitated, then nodded. "Hello." Elena glanced up at Alejandro, not asking, just listening. He told the story in pieces over the afternoon. Enough to explain, not enough to reopen every wound. Elena didn't interrupt. When he finished, she reached for his injured arm with practiced care. "You're staying," she said, not as a question. Alejandro blinked. "We don't want to bring trouble." Elena shot him a look that ended the sentence. "This house has seen worse. And she's a child." May looked between them, uncertainty flickering. "I can work," she said quickly. "I don't take much." Elena's expression softened into something fierce. "You don't have to earn safety," she said. "Not here." That night, Alejandro slept inside four walls for the first time in months. The silence was almost unbearable. He woke twice, reaching for a gun that wasn't there. May didn't sleep either. Elena found her sitting by the window, staring at the dark. "Do you want to know something?" Elena asked, settling beside her. May nodded. "This house," Elena said, "only stands because people decided to come back to it. Over and over. Even when it was hard." May considered that. "Can people really stop running?" Elena smiled gently. "Not all at once. But sometimes, yes." Outside, the wind moved through the grass. Somewhere far away, a single gunshot echoed, and then faded into nothing. Alejandro stood in the doorway, listening, knowing, deep in his bones, that whatever that sound meant, it was no longer chasing them. For the first time since the war ended, he allowed himself to believe the fighting might be done. Morning came softly, like it was afraid to wake them too hard. Sunlight slipped through clean windows and settled on the wooden floor, warm and ordinary. Alejandro lay still for a long moment, listening, not for boots or whistles or distant gunfire, but for the sounds of a house waking up, a kettle, footsteps, a door opening and closing without urgency. It felt unreal, dangerous almost. He sat up slowly, his arms stiff but healing, and pulled on his boots. When he stepped outside, the ranch was already alive. Elena moved between chores with the easy confidence of someone who had learned how to do everything herself. A ranch hand waved to him. Chickens scattered. The world did not end. May stood near the fence, brushing Luna with careful strokes. "You're up early," Alejandro said. She shrugged. "I didn't want to sleep too long. In case this was temporary." The word landed hard. Alejandro leaned against the fence beside her. "It's not," he said, more firmly than he felt. "Not if I can help it." She nodded, but her eyes stayed watchful, always measuring the horizon. Later, Elena handed May a clean shirt, too big but warm, and showed her where things were kept. Not like a guest, like someone who would need to know. At midday, a rider arrived. Alejandro was on his feet before the horse fully stopped, old instincts roaring back to life. The ranch tensed. Hands hovered near rifles. But it was Lucia. She dismounted slowly, scanning faces, her eyes finding Alejandro last. She gave a single nod. "It's done," she said. Alejandro didn't ask how. "He tried to cross the pass alone," Lucia continued. "Snow took the high ground. I took the rest." Silence followed, deep and final. May stepped closer to Alejandro. "He's not coming back?" "No," Lucia said, meeting her gaze. "He's not." Something loosened in May then. Just a little. Not relief exactly, but the space where relief might someday grow. Lucia didn't stay long. She never did. Before she left, she crouched in front of May and pressed the brass whistle back into her hand. "You won't need it here," she said, "but keep it anyway." When she rode away, the ranch exhaled. That night, Elena cooked enough for a celebration, even though no one named it one. They ate until laughter came easier than silence. Someone played an old guitar missing a string. May laughed out loud, sharp and surprised, like the sound startled her. Alejandro watched her from across the table, something heavy and unfamiliar swelling in his chest. Afterward, as stars burned steady above the valley, Elena joined him on the porch. "You didn't tell me everything," she said gently. "No," he admitted. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You don't have to. I see what came back with you," he swallowed. "Is that okay?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, then, "This house remembers loss," she said, "but it's ready to remember something else too." Inside, May slept curled beneath too many blankets, breathing slow and even. Alejandro stayed awake, listening to that sound, realizing that for the first time since the war, He wasn't guarding against death. He was guarding a future. The days did not explode into meaning all at once. They stacked instead. Quiet, uneven, stubborn. Alejandro learned the ranch again, as if it were a language he'd once spoken fluently and forgotten under gunfire. Fences needed mending. Cattle wandered where they pleased. The windmill groaned every afternoon like it was thinking about giving up, but never quite did. His arm healed slowly, angrily, reminding him with every ache that the body remembered, even when the mind wanted to move on. May found her own rhythm. She followed Elena everywhere at first, like a shadow unsure of its right to exist. Then, gradually, she began to drift, toward the animals, toward the creek, toward the small, ordinary mysteries of a place that did not demand running. She asked careful questions. She learned quickly. Too quickly. One afternoon, Alejandro found her standing at the edge of the field, staring at the open land beyond the fences. "What are you looking for?" he asked. She thought about it. "I'm checking if it's still there." "What?" "The feeling that I have to leave." She shook her head slightly. "It's getting quieter." Alejandro sat beside her in the grass. "That doesn't mean it goes away forever." "I know," she said, "but maybe it sleeps." That night, Alejandro dreamed again, but it wasn't fire. It was the mine, the river, the canyon collapsing. Every place he had almost lost her. He woke with his heart racing, breath shallow, the echo of Caldwell's laughter still clinging to him like smoke. Elena was awake instantly. "Here," she murmured, pressing a cup of water into his hand. "You're home. Home." The word sat strangely in his chest, heavy, earned. Weeks passed, no riders came. No whistles split the night. The ranch held. One evening, as the sun slid low and turned the valley copper, May approached Alejandro where he sat repairing a bridle. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Always. If your wife didn't want me here," she said carefully, "what would you do?" The question was a knife wrapped in politeness. Alejandro set the leather down. "Then I would talk to her," he said, "and listen, and protect you anyway." May studied his face, searching for hesitation. She didn't find it. Elena watched from the porch, understanding more than either of them said aloud. Later that night, she joined May at the table with a stack of old papers, maps, letters, a book with half its pages missing. "These are yours now," Elena said, "if you want them." May traced the edge of the book. "Why?" "Because people who stay get to plan," Elena replied. May swallowed. The next morning, Alejandro found a small drawing tucked beneath his coffee cup. 3 figures. A house, a sun that took up too much of the page. On the back, in careful, uneven writing, were 2 words, "I stayed." Alejandro folded the paper carefully and put it in his pocket, close to his heart. Outside, the wind moved through the grass, not as a warning this time, but as a promise that some things, if guarded long enough, could grow instead of burn. The trouble didn't come with guns. That's what fooled everyone. It arrived on a wagon just before noon, wheels creaking, the driver sitting too straight for a man with nothing to hide. Alejandro spotted it from the far fence line and felt the old instinct stir, not panic, not fear, just attention. Elena saw it too. Their eyes met across the yard, no words. None were needed. The man dismounted slowly, hat in hand, smile practiced. He introduced himself as a clerk, papers, permits, borders being redrawn, now that the war was officially finished. He spoke of records, of names. Alejandro's jaw tightened. "We don't keep records here," Elena said calmly. The man smiled wider. "That's becoming a problem." May stood in the doorway behind Elena, half hidden, watching everything. The clerk's eyes flicked to her. Just once, but it was enough. "Child placements are being reviewed," he said. Displaced minors. Migrant cases. She may need to be transferred. The word transferred hit like a gunshot. Alejandro stepped forward. She's not alone. She has family. The clerk raised an eyebrow. Blood. Elena didn't hesitate. She reached back and took May's hand. Yes, she said. The man hesitated now. Papers rustled. He hadn't expected resistance dressed like this. Quiet, firm, unyielding. There are procedures, he said, weaker. May spoke before Alejandro could stop her. I choose them. Every sound in the yard seemed to pause. The clerk looked down at her, surprised. That's not how it works, little one. May stepped fully into the light. Her voice shook, but it did not break. I crossed fires, I crossed water, I crossed dead places. I didn't survive all of that to be told I don't get a say. Alejandro felt something fierce rise in his chest. Pride, awe, fear. Elena squeezed May's hand. The clerk cleared his throat. I'll note your objection. He gathered his papers faster now. There will be follow-ups. He left without another word. The wagon disappeared down the road, dust settling slowly behind it. Only then did Alejandro exhale. May looked up at them, eyes searching. Was that okay? Elena knelt in front of her. That, she said softly, was brave. Alejandro crouched beside them, placing a hand over both of theirs. And brave choices, he added, change things. That night, they sat together on the porch, the three of them, watching the stars come out one by one. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, May leaned against Elena's shoulder. Then, after a pause, against Alejandro's arm too. She didn't pull away. The house creaked gently behind them, as if listening. Tomorrow would bring questions, papers, maybe more men with wagons and smiles that didn't reach their eyes. But tonight, May had chosen. And Alejandro knew, deep and certain, that no matter what came next, he and his wife would stand between her and the world. The war had taken enough. This was the line it would not cross. The follow-ups never came the way Alejandro feared. No wagons in the night, no uniforms at dawn. Just a letter, weeks later, folded thin and careful, asking questions that were already answered by the life happening every day on the ranch. Elena read it once, then set it aside and went back to kneading dough. That was how it ended. Not with gunfire, not with speeches, but with refusal to be moved. Winter came gently that year. Snow dusted the valley without burying it, as if even the season knew better than to push too hard. Alejandro's arm healed into a permanent ache, a reminder etched into bone. He learned how to work around it, how to slow down, how to let other people lift weight. May learned how to stay. At first, she asked permission for everything, to sit, to eat, to laugh. Elena answered every question the same way. You're allowed. The words worked slowly, like medicine. One evening, as the fire snapped and the wind pressed against the windows, May brought out the photograph of her mother. She held it out with both hands. I don't want her to disappear, she said. Elena took the photo and studied it carefully, as if committing the woman's face to memory. Then she placed it on the mantel, beside an old picture of Alejandro before the war, thinner, smiling, still untouched by what would come. She won't, Elena said, not here. Later that night, Alejandro found May asleep at the table, head resting on folded arms, homework half finished. He lifted her carefully and carried her to bed, the same way he had carried her out of the ravine months ago. Only now, there was no gunfire chasing them. As he tucked the blanket around her, she stirred. Are you staying? She asked sleepily. Alejandro smiled, throat tight. Yes, she nodded, satisfied, and drifted back under. Spring arrived with stubborn green shoots, pushing through old scars in the land. Fences were rebuilt. Trees were planted. The ranch grew, not bigger but fuller. One afternoon, Elena called Alejandro and May to the porch. She held a paper in her hands, signed and stamped, the ink still dark. "It's official," she said, "if you want it to be." May didn't reach for the paper. She looked at Alejandro instead. He knelt in front of her. "Nothing changes if you don't want it to," he said. "You already belong." May considered that for a long time. Then she nodded once. "I want my name," she said. "All of it." So they gave it to her. May Marisol Reyes. That night, they ate together under the open sky. Laughter carried across the fields. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass, like scattered stars. Alejandro watched his wife and his daughter. The word, settled at last, and felt the last weight of the war finally loosen its grip. He had crossed fire. He had crossed death. And in the end, what he kept was not a victory, not revenge, not even peace. He kept a life. And for the first time, that was enough.